Have you ever met someone who seems to thrive on stirring up chaos? The kind of person who disrespects others just to get a reaction, like it fuels them? Maybe it's a coworker who throws subtle jabs in meetings, a family member who knows exactly how to push your buttons, or even a stranger online itching for an argument. We live in a world that increasingly rewards outrage, where the loudest voice often gets the most attention. But here's a hard truth that Stoic philosophy knew long before social media existed. Power is not in the chaos, it's in the calm. Let me say that again. True power comes from restraint, not reaction. And that's not just poetic, it's strategic. Because the moment you react emotionally to someone's disrespect, you hand them control. You let them dictate your state of mind. You become a puppet to their provocation. But when you respond, with calm clarity, when you choose silence over shouting, poise over panic, that's when something powerful happens. You flip the script. You disarm the manipulator. You show that your self-respect doesn't depend on anyone else's approval or insults. That's the essence of Stoicism. It's not about being emotionless. It's about being emotionally sovereign. You still feel, but you no longer let those feelings drive you off course. And that's exactly what this video is about. Today, I'm going to share with you 7 Stoic comebacks, quiet, grounded responses that will help you shut down rudeness without raising your voice. These are not cheap clapbacks or sarcastic one-liners. These are dignified replies drawn from the wisdom of ancient Stoics and adapted for modern life. Phrases you can carry with you into any confrontation, be it in the boardroom, around the dinner table, or online. Because here's the thing, you don't need to match someone's disrespect to make your point. You don't need to lower yourself to their level to stand tall. You can protect your peace and still command respect. So if you've ever walked away from an argument thinking, I wish I had handled that better, or if you're simply tired of being pulled into other people's emotional storm, this is for you. It's time to reclaim your inner authority. It's time to respond, not react. Let's begin. Let's start with the first Stoic comeback. It's simple, but it's powerful. You're entitled to your opinion, and I'm entitled to ignore it. Now let that sit for a moment. How many times have you been cornered by someone's unsolicited opinion? They don't ask for context, they don't care about the full story, they just want to criticize, to poke, to provoke. And here's the trap. The moment you react, when you jump to defend yourself, over-explain, or try to change their mind, you're no longer in control. You've given them what they wanted, your attention, your energy, your emotional response. But the Stoics knew this long ago. Reaction is a form of surrender. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You always own the option of having no opinion. There is never a need to get worked up or to trouble your soul." See, rude people often operate from a place of insecurity. Their comments may sound confident, even cutting, but underneath they're usually projecting fear, envy, or frustration. And if you can recognize that in the moment, something powerful happens. You stop taking their words personally. You stop absorbing their chaos as your truth. Let me give you an example. A few years ago, I had a mentor I deeply respected, brilliant, successful, sharp. But one day he gave me feedback that just didn't feel right. He said, "You're not leadership material. You're too quiet. People won't take you seriously." At first I felt that sting, that tightening in the chest, that voice in your head whispering, maybe they're right. But then I paused, and I realized this wasn't about me. It was about him, his definition of leadership, his belief that volume equals authority. What he saw as a weakness was actually one of my strengths, calm presence. So I didn't argue. I didn't plead my case. I just nodded and walked away. Not with bitterness, but with clarity. Because I understood his opinion didn't require my validation. And that's the kind of mental freedom Stoicism offers us. Now I want you to imagine this in your own life. The next time someone criticizes you without compassion, the next time a coworker mocks your idea, or a family member questions your choices not out of love but out of control, instead of snapping back, what if you calmly said to yourself, You're entitled to your opinion, and I'm entitled to ignore it. That phrase doesn't escalate. It doesn't attack. It simply reinforces a boundary and shifts your attention back to where it belongs, within. Because let's be honest, how much energy have you wasted trying to convince people who never wanted to understand you in the first place? How many sleepless nights have you spent replaying one rude comment that, in the grand scheme of life, meant nothing? Seneca said, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." So why let someone else's fleeting judgment become your lifelong burden? Here's what Stoicism teaches us. You don't need to silence rude people. You just need to stop needing their approval. True strength is not in the last word. It's in the ability to walk away, head high, heart grounded. Not because you're weak, but because you're wise enough to know not all battles are worth fighting. So the next time someone tries to pull you into their storm, remember, you don't owe them a storm in return. Your calm is not weakness. It's strategy, it's dignity, it's power. Let's move on to the second Stoic comeback. This one comes with a hint of humor, but its message cuts deep. If I had $1 for every smart thing you said, I'd be broke. Now this line isn't about being cruel or petty, it's about clarity. Because sometimes the best way to shut down arrogance isn't by raising your voice, it's by making the truth obvious, calmly and without apology. We've all encountered that one person who dominates the room, not with wisdom but with volume. You know the type, loud, sarcastic, always the funny one, always interrupting, always needing to be the smartest person in the room. But behind that noise, there's usually fear. Fear of not being enough. Fear of being ignored. Fear of losing control. That's the ironic thing. Those who speak the loudest often feel the smallest inside. I remember this guy. Let's call him Chris. He worked in the same company I did. Every meeting, without fail, he'd talk over people, shoot down ideas with sarcastic comments, and crack jokes at others' expense. He wasn't stupid, but he needed to be seen as clever, constantly. Most people avoided confronting him. They'd either roll their eyes or let him dominate the conversation to keep the peace. But peace doesn't come from tolerating disrespect. It comes from setting quiet, firm boundaries. One day, after interrupting 3 colleagues in less than 5 minutes, Chris turned to me and said with a smirk, "So what groundbreaking idea do you have today?" Now I could have snapped. I could have matched his sarcasm, maybe even humiliated him in front of the team, but I didn't. Instead, I paused, looked him in the eye, and said, "If I had $1 for every smart thing you've said in this meeting, I'd be broke." Silence. Not because I was mean, but because I was right. That single sentence carried more weight than a full-blown argument, and that's the Stoic insight here. Power is not in how loud you speak. It's in how precise you choose to be, and how much you choose not to say. Epictetus said, "It is impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows." People like Chris don't listen. They perform. They thrive on reaction. But when you respond with calm confidence, not bitterness, not sarcasm, just truth, they're exposed. Because here's the thing. Sarcasm can be a weapon, sure, but calm wit? That's a shield and a mirror. It reflects people back to themselves. Now, I'm not saying we should walk around delivering one-liners like some modern-day philosopher warrior. That's not the point. The real point is this. When someone tries to control the room with noise, you don't have to compete. You don't have to shrink or shout. You can stand your ground with quiet clarity. The Stoics taught us that our energy is sacred, and not everyone deserves a response, especially those who use mockery to mask their own fear of being irrelevant. So next time you're in a situation like that, whether it's a team meeting, a family gathering, or even a comment thread online, and someone throws shade wrapped in a joke, pause, smile if you want, and say in that grounded, unshakable tone, "If I had $1 for every smart thing you said, I'd be broke." No shouting, no drama, just clarity. Because in a world obsessed with being clever, sometimes the wisest thing you can do is to be clear. That's Stoicism in action. Let's go to the third Stoic comeback. one that speaks to a kind of strength most people overlook. I don't argue with people who thrive on disrespect. Now this one hits different, because sometimes the smartest thing you can say is nothing at all. There are people out there, maybe even in your workplace, your family, or your online circle, who don't argue to seek truth. They argue to dominate. They provoke not to understand, but to control. And the moment you take the bait, when you get pulled into their energy, you've already lost more than just your peace. You've lost your power. See, the Stoics taught us that not every battle is worth fighting. Epictetus once said, "If someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation." In other words, your peace is your responsibility. Let me share a real-life story. There was a guy named David in my previous job. David was smart, but he weaponized that intelligence. Every meeting, he'd interrupt, criticize, roll his eyes, especially when someone presented a new idea. He loved to challenge people, not from a place of curiosity, but from a need to feel superior. And the more you pushed back, the more disrespectful. He got there one afternoon, a colleague calmly presented a project update. Nothing fancy, just honest work, steady progress. David scoffed and muttered under his breath, "That's what you call strategy?" Everyone looked around, waiting for a reaction. But instead of taking the bait, the presenter just smiled and said, "I don't argue with people who thrive on disrespect. That's it." No shouting, no drama, no defensive speech, just truth. And in that moment, David was silenced, not by aggression, but by clarity. Because you can't win a game that someone else rigs. And when you refuse to play by their toxic rules, they lose their grip. That's what Stoicism teaches us. Restraint isn't weakness. It's wisdom. When you choose not to argue with someone who's clearly not interested in fairness or respect, you're not walking away because you're afraid. You're walking away because you've already won. By protecting your energy, your time, and your emotional center. Now think about this in your own life. Is there someone who constantly pushes your buttons? Maybe they always have something sarcastic to say. Maybe they mock your values, interrupt your thoughts, or question your choices, not out of love or concern, but out of ego. What if instead of defending yourself, you disengaged? What if, instead of explaining yourself, you chose stillness? What if in that moment you simply remembered, "I don't argue with people who thrive on disrespect"? You see, people who rely on disrespect don't know how to handle silence. They expect you to fight back because conflict is their currency. But when you don't spend your energy on them, you cut them off at the source. You show that their behavior doesn't deserve your attention, because your attention is valuable. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this and you will find strength. So let me ask you, where are you wasting your strength today? Who are you arguing with, hoping they'll understand you, when they've already shown you they're not listening? Let this comeback be your line in the sand, not as a witty comeback, not as a power play, but as a standard that says, "My peace is not negotiable. My energy is not entertainment. And my attention is not a reward for bad behavior." That's not ego. That's self-respect. And when you carry that clarity into your conversations, you stop reacting and start leading. So the next time someone tries to bait you with mockery, with dominance, with veiled insults, pause, breathe, and say calmly, "I don't argue with people who thrive on disrespect." Then walk away. With your dignity intact and your power fully in your hands, let's move on to the fourth Stoic comeback, one that might seem simple at first, but carries a deep truth about how power, arrogance, and legacy work in the real world. Your attitude isn't going to get you very far in life. Now that's not said out of bitterness or spite. It's not a jab, it's a mirror. Because while arrogance may look like confidence and cruelty might feel like control, in the long run, these traits aren't signs of strength. They're signs of a person on the path to collapse. Let me tell you about someone I used to work with. We'll call him Alan. Alan was the kind of manager people feared, not because he was effective, but because he was loud, controlling, and constantly critical. He believed leadership was about domination, not inspiration. Every meeting felt like a performance, a chance for him to assert his power and belittle someone in the room. And for a while, it worked. People stayed quiet. They followed orders. He thought he was winning. But here's the thing. Respect built on fear is never real. It's just silence waiting to break. Over time, Alan's team became disengaged. Turnover skyrocketed. And when the company began looking for a new executive leader, guess what? Alan, the one who always acted like he was next in line, wasn't even considered. Instead, someone younger, quieter, and far more emotionally intelligent got the job. Someone who knew how to lead through calm, not command through chaos. And when Alan found out, he lashed out at the team. He blamed others. He accused people of sabotaging him. But deep down, he knew. He knew his own attitude had finally caught up with him. That's when someone from the leadership board said to him, not in anger, not in mockery, but in honest clarity, "Your attitude isn't going to get you very far in life." And that stuck with me because it reminded me of something Seneca once wrote. No man was ever wise by chance. Wisdom, character, emotional control, these aren't accidents. They're choices. Daily ones. Now here's the Stoic insight. Sometimes the most powerful confrontation doesn't come from shouting or shaming. It comes from calmly holding up a mirror, letting someone see the consequences of their own behavior without emotional fireworks. When you say your attitude isn't going to get you very far in life, you're not insulting them. You're offering them a moment of truth. Whether they take it or not, that's on them. But you've already won, because you didn't stoop to their level. You didn't let their arrogance provoke yours, and that's the Stoic way. Think about this. How many people have you seen rise quickly through aggression, ego, manipulation, only to fall just as fast because they couldn't sustain respect? How many relationships, careers, or reputations have you seen crumble, not because of a lack of skill, but because of unchecked attitude? We often think of confrontation as loud, messy, dramatic. But Stoicism teaches us a different kind of power, the power to confront without chaos, the courage to speak truth without losing composure. So next time you're dealing with someone who acts like dominance is the same as leadership, someone who confuses cruelty with strength, and they throw their weight around like the world owes them something, look them in the eye, breathe, and say with calm authority, your attitude isn't going to get you very far in life. Not to hurt them, but to free yourself. From the need to please, from the illusion that silence equals approval, from the burden of carrying someone else's ego, because at the end of the day, what you tolerate, you reinforce, and what you calmly confront, you transform. So let this be your quiet, powerful line in the sand. Now let's talk about one of the most quietly powerful things you can say when someone is trying to draw you into a toxic conversation. This conversation was over before it even started. It's subtle, it's calm, but it's firm, and more importantly, it closes the door without slamming it. See, sometimes the most dangerous form of disrespect isn't loud. It's not the yelling or the name-calling, it's the passive aggression. The snide remarks disguised as questions, the fake smiles hiding criticism, the tension that simmers just below the surface, waiting for you to explode just so they can say, "See? You're the emotional one." Sound familiar? Let me tell you about a woman I deeply respect. Her name is Maria. She led a small, creative team in a fast-paced agency, and she was sharp, quiet but sharp. There was another team member, we'll call him Evan, who constantly undermined her during meetings. He never attacked her directly. Instead, he'd throw in little comments like, "Oh, I guess that's one way to approach it," or "Interesting idea," though it might be a bit basic. Each comment came with a smile, as if it was harmless. But everyone in the room could feel it. It wasn't harmless. It was manipulative. It was meant to bait her, to chip away at her confidence without ever raising his voice. Now, Maria could have called him out. She could have made it a scene. But she didn't. One day, during yet another meeting where Evan tried his subtle sabotage, Maria let him finish his backhanded comment. Then she looked up and said, without raising her voice, without a trace of emotion, "This conversation was over before it even started." Then she turned back to her presentation and continued like nothing happened. And in that moment, something shifted. Evan was silenced. Not because he was shouted down, but because Maria made it clear. She saw through the game. She wasn't playing. And more importantly, she wasn't bothered. That's the Stoic power in action. Indifference, not anger, is the most disarming response to manipulation. The moment someone realizes they can't trigger you, they lose control. They either escalate and reveal their own instability, or they retreat because your calm becomes their mirror. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Choose not to be harmed and you won't feel harmed. Don't feel harmed and you haven't been." That's what this line does. This conversation was over before it even started. It refuses to legitimize a toxic dynamic. It tells the manipulator, "You may be speaking, but I'm not participating. You may be baiting, but I'm not biting." And here's the deeper truth. Most toxic conversations aren't really conversations at all. They're traps, designed to corner you, to get you emotional, to pull you into a power struggle where you end up defending yourself against things that were never said outright. But the moment you recognize the pattern, when you stop reacting and start observing, you gain the upper hand. Not to win an argument, but to protect your peace. So ask yourself, where in your life have you been dragged into conversations that were already poisoned before they began? Where have you wasted hours, days, even years trying to earn respect from someone who never offered it in good faith? You don't need to scream to end the cycle, you just need clarity, and sometimes clarity sounds like, "This conversation was over before it even started." Say it gently. Say it firmly. Say it with self-respect. Then disengage. That is not avoidance, that is discernment. And the Stoics would tell you, it's one of the highest forms of strength. So the next time someone tries to pull you into their web of games, guilt, or veiled insults, pause. Look them in the eye, and let them know, without rage, without performance, this conversation was over before it even started. Then walk away, with your dignity untouched and your inner peace intact. Let's move to Stoic comeback number 6, one that blends humor, clarity, and inner strength into a single, powerful sentence. Thanks for your input. I'll be sure to forget it immediately. Now, before you smile, let's talk about why this works so well. We've all been on the receiving end of feedback that wasn't really feedback. You know what I mean? It's the kind of comment that sounds like advice, but you can feel it's laced with something else. Bitterness, envy, or subtle condescension. Someone tells you, maybe if you didn't try so hard, people would actually like you. Or, I'm just saying this because I care. But your work is kind of underwhelming. And the worst part? They wrap it in a fake smile or a casual tone, like they're doing you a favor. But here's the truth. Not all feedback is meant to help you. Sometimes it's meant to control you, to get under your skin, to plant seeds of doubt, quietly, strategically. The Stoics understood this long before corporate email or social media existed. They knew that the way others speak often says more about them than it does about you. So what do you do when someone gives you rude, manipulative feedback pretending to be helpful? You look at them, you smile, and you say, "Thanks for your input. I'll be sure to forget it immediately." It's not cruel, it's not loud, it's simply a reminder that you decide what stays in your mind and what doesn't. Let me give you a real-world example. A friend of mine, let's call her Rachel, was working on a personal art project outside of her day job. She was pouring her heart into it, late nights, weekends, learning new tools. And one day she finally got up the courage to show it to a colleague she thought she could trust. His response? "Well, this is cute, but you know this kind of thing won't ever go anywhere, right?" He chuckled, like it was nothing. Like her dreams were some quirky hobby not worth taking seriously. Now Rachel could have gotten angry. She could have argued, defended herself, explained her plans, but she didn't. She looked at him and said with a light laugh, "Thanks for your input. I'll be sure to forget it immediately." And then she went back to creating. That's the Stoic power. You acknowledge the noise without letting it enter your inner world. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The opinion of 10,000 men is of no value if none of them know anything about the subject." See, we often make the mistake of assuming every voice deserves space in our minds. But just because someone says something doesn't mean it carries truth. And just because they believe it strongly doesn't mean you need to carry it with you. The key lesson here is this: indifference is not the same as apathy. Indifference, when used wisely, is a shield. It protects your peace from being pierced by uninvited criticism. So when someone gives you unsolicited advice with a smug tone, or offers feedback that feels more like a jab than a gift, you don't have to argue. You don't have to explain. You don't even have to care. You can simply say, "Thanks for your input. I'll be sure to forget it immediately," and move on with your day. Because you decide what becomes part of your mindset. You decide what you absorb and what you reject. So ask yourself, how much mental space have you given to comments that didn't deserve even a second of your time? How often have you replayed criticism that wasn't rooted in truth, but in someone else's ego? The Stoics would say, guard your mind like a fortress. Not every passerby deserves entrance. So the next time someone tries to slip their judgment into your mental inbox, flag it as spam, gracefully, and let this line be your filter. "Thanks for your input. I'll be sure to forget it immediately." And now we come to the final Stoic comeback on this list, perhaps the sharpest and yet the most graceful. "You seem really dedicated to making a fool of yourself." Now this line isn't about cruelty. It's not about revenge. It's about holding up a mirror with just enough clarity to let the other person see the reflection they've been trying to avoid. Because here's the truth. Some people don't argue to make a point. They argue to gain control. They stir up conflict not to find truth, but to feed their own ego. They heckle, mock, and insult, believing their loudness will mask their ignorance. But what happens when you don't fight back? What happens when you stay calm, when you stay composed, when you answer their noise with grounded silence or graceful truth? They reveal themselves, fully, loudly, and foolishly. Let me share a moment in history that captures this perfectly. It was during the Civil Rights Movement. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was giving a speech, a message of unity, equality, nonviolence. But in the middle of it, a heckler began shouting at him from the crowd. Now Dr. King could have stopped everything. He could have shouted back, humiliated the man, made an example out of him. But instead, he paused. He looked at the heckler, and with the same calm he used to lead a movement, he smiled and said, "You seem really committed to misunderstanding everything I just said." And then, he went right back to his message. The crowd went silent. Because, in that moment, everyone saw the difference between noise and wisdom, between ego and clarity, between someone desperate for attention and someone rooted in purpose. That's the power of this line. You seem really dedicated to making a fool of yourself. It doesn't shout. It doesn't mock. It just quietly points out the obvious. And that's what Stoicism is all about. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." So when someone attacks you publicly or privately, not out of reason but out of pride, your strongest response is composure. Because people who stir conflict are often digging their own graves, verbally, socially, professionally. All you have to do is not dig with them. Now I want you to think about your own life. Have you ever been in a situation where someone kept pushing your buttons? Someone who insulted you in front of others, hoping to embarrass you or knock you off balance? Maybe it was in a work meeting. Maybe it was in front of family. Maybe it was online, where anonymity gives cowards confidence. In those moments, you might have felt the urge to clap back, to defend your name, to shut them down with force. But here's what the Stoics would ask. At what cost? Because when you step into the mud with someone who has nothing to lose, you risk losing what they've already given up: dignity. So the next time someone tries to make a spectacle out of you, instead of matching their noise, try something different. Look at them, breathe, and if you feel it's the right moment, calmly say, "You seem really dedicated to making a fool of yourself." Then move on. Not because you're dismissive, but because you're free. Free from the need to prove yourself. Free from the illusion that their opinion defines your worth. Free from the emotional games that only drain your energy and distract you from your purpose. That's Stoicism in action. It's not about having the last word. It's about choosing the right words, or no words at all, and letting your character speak louder than your voice. So let me leave you with this. In a world full of people trying to outshout one another, be the one who listens more than they speak. Be the one who doesn't need applause to know their value. Be the one who lets fools reveal themselves while you stay grounded in your peace. Because when your response is rooted in wisdom, even your silence becomes a powerful statement. So, let's bring it all together. These 7 Stoic comebacks, they aren't about being clever. They're not for winning arguments or scoring points in front of a crowd. They're about something deeper, something quieter and infinitely more powerful. Self-mastery. Because in the end, it's not about controlling the situation. It's about controlling yourself within the situation. That's where the real strength lies. Not in the perfect comeback, not in putting someone in their place, but in staying firmly in your place, centered, clear, and untouchable. The Stoics didn't train themselves to be emotionless robots. They trained themselves to be emotionally sovereign, to choose clarity over chaos, grace over reaction, and restraint over dominance. Let's look at that more closely. Calm over chaos. When the world around you gets loud, when someone mocks you, challenges you, tries to provoke you, do you join the chaos? Or do you choose stillness? Calm is not weakness, it's control. And in a storm, the calmest one in the room is the one with the most power. Precision over performance. You don't need to raise your voice to raise your standards. A precise word spoken with intention carries more weight than any outburst. When you speak, speak like someone who doesn't need to be heard to be confident. Let your words serve, not just fill the air. Detachment over dominance. You don't have to win. You don't have to prove yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. The Stoic mindset says, I release the need to control others, and in doing so, I gain full control over myself. And that's the ultimate reminder. You can't stop people from being rude, manipulative, or disrespectful. You can't rewrite their behavior. You can't force them to understand your heart, but you can choose how much of it you let in. You can decide which words enter your mind, and which ones pass like wind through an open window. You can say, that doesn't belong to me. That energy isn't mine to carry. That disrespect is loud, but my peace is louder. Because that's what makes you dangerous, in the best way. Not your ability to fight, but your refusal to be dragged into unnecessary battles. Let others wrestle with your silence. Let them get tangled in their own noise while you walk away, calm, composed, and unbothered, because you know who you are. And when you know who you are, no insult can take that away. No opinion can shake it. No provocation can possess it. So, the next time someone tries to draw you into their drama, pause, breathe, and remember, you were never meant to master the moment. You were meant to master yourself inside it. And that, my friend, is where Stoic power truly begins. If this message resonated with you, if you're committed to protecting your peace and leading with strength, consider subscribing for more content, rooted in timeless wisdom. And remember, sometimes silence is your sharpest sword.